Hey everyone, welcome to the final part of our three-part series on building end-to-end CI/CD capabilities with Azure Pipelines. Really excited to have you here today. I'm Sydney Andrews. I've been with you for parts one and parts two of this series. Today we are going to dig into deploying our code using Docker containers. To a container registry. I'm going to leave it a little bit of surprise which one, and we are going to use those Docker containers that we build and push, and we're going to use them in our Azure services. So this is always my favorite part. Real quick about myself, my name is Sydney Andrews again. I'm an Azure MVP, Microsoft Certified Trainer. We are going to go over a lot of content here. So I'm looking around at multiple monitors, checking the chat on the side, looking at the material in the middle. If you got questions, please, throw them in the chat. I'm going to try and answer them as best I can whenever I can. If I don't get to your question answer, msusdev at Microsoft.com. Once again, that's msusdev at Microsoft.com. That's our email. Please, send us an email with your questions. We'd love for you to get a lot of value from this series. We also have all of our demos. All the demos are showing you today. All the demos are showing you parts one and parts two of the series. They are all available on GitHub. So if you missed parts one and two, you can always go back into playlists, watch them, and glean a lot of information from that. If you are looking for the demo code, all of it for all three parts are on GitHub at the GitHub repo. You'll see these links show up again throughout the presentation. Not a lot of slides today, but I do want to talk about where we are in this series. In our first session, we introduced Azure Pipelines, and I taught you how to build a scratch-built, fresh, by hand pipeline YAML file, line by line. We learned, what works, what doesn't work. If you haven't seen that session, please go back and look at it because I think it's really important to be able to write that YAML by hand. That way, when you're using tools, you're debugging, you're troubleshooting, at least you'll have a really strong understanding of how everything works in the YAML file. After that, we looked into continuous integration. We did a whole session where we took a .NET console template app and we continuously built it and created like a console executable and a NuGet package. And we released those. We released the NuGet package to the NuGet package manager website, so NuGet.org, so people can install it as a .NET tool. But we also created build artifacts, so that was pretty fun. We're going to review a little bit for session two before we get started today, just so refresh your memory. And then today is our third and final session. We're going to take a sample web application I built. It's Dockerized, so we have a Docker file. We're going to take a look at that. We are going to build the Docker file in Azure Pipeline, and then we are going to push the built container image to a container registry. So let's talk about that. We're going to have a web app. We're going to test it as a Docker container. We're going to go create an Azure Container Registry resource. Everything I'm showing you, you could do with ACR, but you could definitely do it with a Docker Hub and any other type of container registry that you prefer that supports that Docker standardized format. Then once we have that, we are going to automatically push to that Azure Container Registry instance our resource using our Azure Pipelines. And then we'll take the image in ACR, we'll pull it locally, we'll push it out to Azure Container Apps, Azure Web Apps. We'll have a lot of fun. So real quick, I like to level set by reviewing what we already know. So basically, I have my browser open here. And if you missed session two, please, go back. We go into this much deeper. But just a real quick setup of where we are. We had our .NET console app template repository. And what we did is we used this template and we created a repository. I'm going to call this March 18 first. And just make this a public repository, and I'll create it in my msusdev examples organization. And what this does is it takes that sample.NET console application and just creates a new repository generated from that with only the main branch. So somebody said in the chat, these videos are super helpful. We're really glad that this is a lot of value to you. Definitely want to be able to continue to provide value. And again, after these videos are over, if you want to go to the GitHub repo and look at the code, please do. Awesome. So we have our .NET Console app, and this is where, as far as we got in our first session, we were able to go in and open it up in a tool like GitHub Code Spaces. I'm going to just show you how to do this in GitHub Code Spaces. For most of today, we'll be working locally, but I always just like to show here's what it looks like in Code Spaces, just because it's a little bit simpler to just spin it up. So we have this repo. We'll create a new integration.yaml file, understanding that the name of this YAML file is completely arbitrary. And then we built out a really complex one. I'm going to go line by line. We had a pool from the pool of agents we're going to use. We want to use ones that have a tag that their VM image is Ubuntu latest. Then we had a stages array, and within the stage array, we have our first stage, which is CI, and we're really good about display names, so continuous integration. Awesome. We had a jobs array with a single job called build with a wonderful display name. And this one was build project assets. I believe we built within a container, so mcr.microsoft.com, .NET SDK 6.0. Just double check my notes, make sure I have no typos. And we had an array of steps. And this is where things got really interesting because when we played around with this project, we knew if we ran it using .NET Run, it will list off all of the places where you can rent an office space, no matter how many seats are available. But if we did .NET Run, and I'm just ignoring the .NET flags and using my own custom flags, I believe one of my flags is seats, and say, you know what, I only want office spaces with rooms with at least 4 seats. I can run that command too. So we were able to test it out locally. We're also able to test out things like publishing it locally. .NET Publish. And I'm going through this fast. This is a review. If you want to go much deeper into this, we go really deep in the session 2 video. So .NET Publish configuration release, output out folder. We made it self-contained, so you don't have to have .NET running on that machine. But we set the runtime to Win x64. Obviously, you're going to run the .NET Publish multiple times for like 32-bit builds, 64 ARM builds, stuff, so on and so forth. Different OSs, and I'm just trying to be as general as possible here. And then we updated our project, CS project file by saying publish single file equals true. So this should create an out folder here with 3 files. Should be our exe, our debug symbols, and then an XML file with our comments from our C# code. There's an out folder. There's an exe, debug symbols, and XML comments. That's how we created our executable. And that's executable you can distribute. As a matter of fact, I'm going to download it to my local machine. I have a lot of stuff on my local machine, so I apologize. I'm not gonna download to my local machine, but you could download to your local machine and run it. I'm just trying to run through this demo real quick. So .NET Pack output package version equals 1.0.0, and that created our NuGet package Contoso Spaces Console 1.0.0 new package. So I mean, if we was to write this out as a script, we would say .NET Publish. Then we could just copy all this essentially. So I'll copy this and paste. And then I like to use I like the multi-line stuff. It's just a little bit more readable, in my opinion. I definitely know that I'm very likely to be wrong on a lot of things. So there's our script. Display name is publish executable. And then let's see. I need to tab the script over a little bit. There we go. It's the syntax highlight is letting me know when I make a mistake. I'll run another script. This one will be .NET Pack. Same concept here. Just copy that, and then just make it a multi-line script here. Wonderful. And display name, public package for NuGet. And then the last thing we had is we publish these as build artifacts. So we had a publish step, and we say for the first one, it's out contoso spaces console.exe. You'll see it over here. Have a typo. We'll fix that typo. And then we just give it an artifact name. Artifact. I'll call this console exe. We can give it a display name just so it looks good in Azure Pipelines. Publish, create executable build artifact. And then we'll do the same thing for our NuGet package. So publish pkg contoso.spaces.console 1.0.0.new package. And again, if you're doing this for real, you might want to use variables for your version names or something even more sophisticated for semantic versioning. We're just doing a really quick demo here. Create package build artifact will be our display name, so it looks good in Azure Pipelines. And our artifact here will be called NuGet package. So if I don't have any typos, hope this works. Commit that, sync it up from our local repo to GitHub. We'll kick back here. We will check. There's our integration YAML file. So if I have no typos, if I go to GitHub Actions, well, actually not GitHub Actions. I'm not sure why I'm checking GitHub Actions. I'm talking about Azure Pipelines today. I've been doing so many demos. I'm completely blanked on there. So we're going to create a Azure Pipelines repository. Uh, really hilarious misspeak on my part. No worries. So we're going to call this project name March 18. We'll make it a public project. And we have our integration YAML file that's on GitHub. And it's kind of, I'm actually, you know what? I'm glad I showed you that in GitHub Actions, nothing's happened. Just because we created a YAML file doesn't mean GitHub Actions is going to pick it up. GitHub Actions requires the YAML file to have a certain format, to be in a specific folder, .github/workflows. We're just creating a YAML file that we're going to use with Azure Pipelines. So I'm going over here. I'm in Azure DevOps. Going to go to Azure Pipelines, hit Create Pipeline. Going to go to GitHub. And I have lots of GitHub repos I have access to. So I'm going to be very specific here and say, you know what? All repositories and should have March 18th -1st. All right, it says, how do you want to configure your pipeline? Well, I have an existing YAML file. It's in a main branch, and the path is integration.yaml. Hit continue. It's going to check, make sure everything looks good. We have our 2 scripts and the 2 published steps. It looks good to me. I hit show assistant if I wanted to add more stuff, but today I don't need to add anything else, so we will hit run. It's creating our Azure Pipelines pipeline, redundancy intended. And there we go. And this is pretty much got us all up to speed on what we did all the way up to session 2. And this is really important because, be able to run those scripts and be able to, publish a .NET project that allows us to go in and essentially be very flexible. So here we go. We're running this all again within this .NET SDK 6.0 container. It's a good container. Really, really appreciate it very much. We are going to check out the code once that container is downloaded. Then we'll publish our executable, .NET Publish, package with NuGet with .NET Pack. We'll create a build artifact for the exe. And then we will create a NuGet package build artifact. If you heard my phone ring, I have no idea. I've been using smartphones for years, and I have no idea how to silence them. If you hit the switch, it still rings. If you hit do not disturb, sometimes it'll still ring. It's beyond me. I can code up a cloud-based serverless application all you want. I cannot figure out how to get my phone to be quiet. All right, job's done. We have 2 published artifacts. That's our exe, Contoso Spaces Console exe, and our NuGet package. We could download these. I can manually upload this to NuGet.org. I could download this, run this on my local machine. Of course, my browser is going to say, are you crazy? Because this is not signed. And I have to keep saying, ignore my craziness until it lets me run it. But it totally works. All right. So that's got us all up to speed. I really wanted to walk through this because I think it's going to be really important today that we've seen how this pipeline works, because we are going to go back to msusdev examples. And just for those who are just joining us, we used the .NET Console project earlier. That's on Contoso Spaces .NET Console app. By the way, every link you see on your screen is already in the description box here on YouTube. So please, go check it out. Now we're going to switch it up. We are going to our Blazor project. No one word difference. Instead of .NET Console app, is .NET Web App. This is, again, another template repository. This is a Blazor web application. It's pretty cool because we can build it, and essentially it's a static website that can be hosted on any static web server. So I'm going to use this template and create a new repository. I'm going to call this March 18 second or last. I'm not going to create any more after this. So last is perfectly fine. I'm going to make this a public repository. Did not mean to print. Create repository from template. No worries. All right. Again, all the links are in the description box. If you want to see our slides or any of the scripts I'm following in these demos, please, github.com, msusdev, and NCICD. We try to open source everything we're doing on these webinars so that you can go in, learn, and gain value for this. All right, so we have a web application. I could run this in GitHub Code Spaces. I'm going to pull this on my local machine. I just want you to show you that the workflow is really the same. So I got Windows Terminal, git clone, that repo. I copied the git URI for the repo that I just created, and I'm going to clone it to my local folder instead of allowing the git tool to decide on a folder name, which typically would be the repo name. So git clone, and then I have this folder already open in Visual Studio Code. So you see I have my applications all here. Everything looks good. I mean, this is a web application. It has a Docker file. So if I wanted to test it out, I could just Docker build. So let's look at this Docker file real quick. Um, it starts with the .NET SDK, and it creates a working directory called app, and it copies all this into the app directory. Now, I could definitely have a Docker ignore and do some more sophisticated things here, but this is just a demo, so we're not going to stress too much about that. Now, this is where it gets really interesting, right? We run .NET Publish. It looks exactly like we did with the console application. I mean, I could run it locally. Let me copy this command, .NET Publish, and show you exactly what it does. This is a Blazor web application. So we run .NET Publish, configuration release, output, out folder. And just for convenience, I've already set up the git ignore to ignore the out folder so you don't accidentally commit it back in. Here we go. It's compressing Blazor WebAssembly publish artifacts. It's doing a whole bunch of fun stuff. And then once it's done, we should have an out folder here. Just give it a second. I'm jumping the gun a little bit on this. Again, you got any questions, please, throw them in the chat. Here we go. There's an out folder with our web config file and our www root. Web config file is necessary if we're hosting this on IIS, but if we're not, the web root is perfectly fine. Our index HTML, styles, images, data, and then the framework which is all the JavaScript files that's needed for Blazor and all of our DLLs that's needed for the .NET side of things. So this is beautiful. This is basically .NET running client side. So again, really exciting stuff. So we're going to take this, and obviously there's lots of modification, optimizations we could do. I have done none of them. This is a vanilla, simple project. Wanted to make this something that you can just run yourself and get through as simple as possible. So the next thing our Docker file does is it starts with an Nginx Alpine container image. This is just a super, super slim web server. It copies everything from that app out www root. Remember, our working directory is app. So that's going to be out www root. And it copies it into the HTML folder for Nginx. And it also copies, I have an Nginx config file that just sets up the web server with some really simple sane defaults. And once we have that all set up, pretty much we expose port 80 and we are cooking. So this is how I'm hosting Blazor. My actual final container image is not going to have anything .NET specific other than what runs client side on it. So it's running within this much slimmer container image than we would normally get. Let's test it out. Docker build tag .NET Web App, and the context of this Docker build is the current folder. So I use dot. I say this is gonna be fast, but with my luck, it's gonna take almost a minute, but that's okay. Just for those who are just joining us, remember everything I'm showing you, github.com, msusdev, and CICD. Every link I'm showing on the screen is in the description box. If you got questions, please throw them in the chat. We are here to answer your questions. If you come up with a question after this session and you say, or maybe I gave you an answer, you didn't like my answer, msusdev at Microsoft.com, email us. We love to help get you unstuck. If you're trying out some of this technology, we're here to help you out. All right, we're almost done. It's publishing our Blazor web application to that special www root folder. Take a sip of water and give it some time to cook. I'm pretty sure there's some saying about a watch pot boiling, but We're just going to trust the process here. Here we go. Export an image and copied everything into the Nginx image. We are good to go. So if I go back to Visual Studio Code, I have the Docker extension installed. So I'll see I have a new image here. I'll refresh the .NET Web App with the latest tag. Since I didn't specify a tag, it's just gonna infer latest, right? And I'm gonna run this. So Docker run detach. So it's just running in the background. Publish, and I'm gonna port 5,000. I'm gonna map to port 80 because I don't want to open up. I don't want to use port 80 in my local machine. .NET Web App latest. There we go. There's the unique identifier from my running container. Go to Visual Studio Code. See that I have a container with an automatically generated name, which is risky on a live webinar, but I just realized it. And I'm going to go in, hit open in browser. I open a browser on another one of my windows, but you see it's localhost 5,000. And here I have my application. We go in, we can go to the page for any individual center. We can go to the locations landing page. I mean, it's a perfectly functioning application. Everything looks good, runs good. Everything's good to go. So we know the Docker build works. But I mean, what use is this as Azure Pipelines webinar if we're building it locally, right? Let's build this in Azure Pipelines. So I'm going to create a pipeline file called docker.yaml. And this pipeline file, this is where I'm really going to have fun. I can write it here, but you know what? I've changed my mind. I'm going to live on the wild side today. I'm not going to create this file locally. I'm going to make sure I'm synced with my remote repository. I'm going to go into Azure Pipelines. I'm throwing a curveball here. We have our pipelines, one for March 18th first. We'll create a new pipeline. GitHub is our source. For the repository, this was March 18th last repository, so I'll just find that real quick. There we go. March 18th last repository. And I'm going to go with some of his recommendations. So I can do a starter pipeline, or I can say, you know what? They have a recommendation on how to build a Docker image. So they said, okay, where's your Docker file? Well, they assume it's going to be in the root of your build source code, so sources directory, and it's going to be called Docker file. Let's check. Is it in the root? Yes. Is it called Docker file? Yes. Okay, that's sensible default for me. Hit validate and configure, and it's going to create a pipeline for me. Now they have all sorts of stuff in here. It's up to you whether you want to use it or not. They have a stage called build, a job called build, and the pool is specified in the job, and it has a single task to build a Docker image. And these are the defaults they went with. For the command is the build, the Docker file is build sources directory Docker file, and then it's just going to use this variable called tag. If you go up here, is build.build ID. That's where they get the tag from. So, I mean, useful, but I think we could do a little bit better, right? I'm going to delete it all because I'm living on the wild side. You can always gin this up if you want. So I'm going to build this from scratch based upon what we already know. So we know that we can specify a pull at the top across the entire pipeline. Um, we can, after we do that, create a stages array and create a first stage. I'm going to call this CD. Display name for the stage is, I'm going to zoom in a little bit, a continuous deployment. And create a jobs array with a single job called Docker build. And the display name for this job is going to be build Docker container image. And it's going to have a steps array. Okay, so this is just exactly how we built our pipelines before. Just showing you that a lot of the syntax is the same. We can build this from scratch. We can use the sensible defaults. It's 100% up to you. But I want to show you the assistant over here because this makes it much easier for you to learn how to build Azure pipelines in YAML. I'm going to look for a Docker task. There's a wonderful one to build and push Docker images, log in or log out. This sounds like exactly what I want to do. So I'm going to go and it says, okay, container repository. Think of this as the name of your container image. That's not correct. Repository is the correct name here, but this is where we can specify that. I'm going to skip that for now. For commands, instead of build and push, I'm just going to build. My Docker file, they're just using they're just saying Dockerfile root, but you can also do build sources directory Dockerfile. Either one will work. I'll leave the build context to default. For tags, they recommend the build ID. If you haven't seen that yet, I'm gonna go to another pipeline so you can see this. When we had our March 18th first pipeline, every time you build, it has a build ID. So here we have a build ID of 1. So I believe, let me make sure I have that right. No, this build ID is 54. I apologize, not 1. So as a build ID of 54, since that's a unique ID, that's probably a good candidate for tags, but you can do semantic versioning, you can do all sorts of fancy stuff here. I can also make it so that every time we build this container image, we apply the latest tag. Again, lots of flexibility there. I'm not going to mess with anything else. I'm going to just hit add, and we have our Docker task. And that's wonderful because, again, the command here is build Docker files. The Docker file tags is build ID and latest. Let's build something. So we are going to hit save and run. Initial Docker build will be my commit message. I commit directly to the main branch because we're just doing a demo. Again, PR this in, do things the more sophisticated way whenever you can, right? All right, so we're building our Docker container image for the first time. We're getting an agent running Ubuntu latest. Here we go. It's checking out our code because remember, checkout is inferred. Then it's running the Docker step. We didn't add a display name. I should probably add a display name. I would definitely fix that. It's pulling down the .NET SDK container image, and it's going to perform the build steps. So again, this takes it, it takes about 30 seconds to a minute. A couple things I want to call out. You probably noticed there's 2 check marks that said, apply metadata about this build process and base container images. That's what they're going to do is they're going to add extra steps to the end of the Docker file to add labels. Again, this is really useful if you want each container image to have some metadata in it about how it was built. And again, if this is not like a public facing image, that could be incredibly useful when you're just trying to nail down some issue that you really can't figure out. Well, why does this happen? Which build was this associated with? So here we go. We'll see that's applying those labels because expose 80 was step 8. The last 10 or so steps is applied all these labels that are really useful information for us. Again, especially from a dev perspective. Okay, so we built a container image, but I want to call out something really interesting here. We didn't specify a repository name. So when it built the container image, it gave it an automatically generated name. Now that's pretty useless to us. We really wanted to have a more let's call it a more user-friendly name, right? So I'm gonna go back in here. We have our Docker 2 task. You'll see it has this little settings button. I'm gonna go ahead and click the settings button, and the settings button allows us to do some really cool things like go in and edit what we've already set up instead of having to manually add it all over again. So there's the container repository, and this is where I'm going to give it a name, .NET Web App. Hit add, and it just updates my task here. So that way I don't have to, again, memorize the syntax or anything like that. If I hit save, I'm going to update container repository name as my commit message. Hit save. I'm going to just jump back into the pipeline. Going to last, refresh. There's an update container repository name. Again, if you got questions, please throw them in the chat. If you've never seen this step before, you want to read more about it, here is a great link. And is again in the description box to how this Docker build step works and how to build Docker container images using Azure Pipelines. I keep saying I'm going to add a display name, but I don't think I'm going to add a display name. I think I'm going to forget until the end of this demo. All right, so we're building out. It's again running, seems to be running a lot faster on my local machine. Now I need to get a new local machine. So running .NET Publish. Blazer's almost done with his publishing steps. Then it'll copy everything over into the Nginx container, and then after that we'll have a container image that is really lightweight that can run Blazor and properly named. But again, right now, the only thing we're really doing is we're just building it locally within this build agent. But just like with our artifacts in the previous session, session two, we talk about, once this agent's gone, this container image is gone. So it's nice that we can build it, but we need to actually push it somewhere. And this is where using a container registry becomes really interesting. All right, so if we go back to the Docker step and scroll all the way to the bottom, you'll see it's actually built this container image with the automatically generated name, and then tagged it .NET Web App 56, which is the build ID. You'll see that right in my URI, and then .NET Web App latest. So this is wonderful. We're now cooking. So let's go back to our pipelines. We're going to go March 18th last. We'll hit edit, and we'll keep playing with this because this is where things get interesting. We now have a properly named container image, but I want to send this somewhere. I want to send this to Azure Container Registry. So let's actually go to portal.azure.com, and I'm going to create a new resource. I'm going to go to containers, and I'm going to choose Azure Container Registry. And I'm going to I'm going to create a new resource group called msusdev. I'm going to call this registry March 18, and I'll just create ECUS. I'm not gonna worry about SKU or anything like that. I hit review create. If you don't create it in a premium SKU, I believe it's public network access by default. That doesn't mean your images can be publicly pulled. It just means that you can access it from any computer. You don't necessarily have to be on a VNet to access it. All right, container registry is ready. And what I'm going to do, and I'm not too worried about this because I'll regen these keys as soon as this demo's done. I'm going to go to access keys. I'm going to enable an admin user so I can actually log in. And this is the simplest way. There's actually other ways with service principals to log in. But for a demo, this is going to be the easiest way to do it because it's very close to how we log into Docker Hub. So I'm going to go in. I have another tab open with Azure Pipelines. Same project, just a different tab. I'm going to go to project settings. I'm going to create a service connection. I'm going to create a new service connection to a Docker registry. Hit next. You have lots of options. You can go to Docker Hub. You can go to Azure Container Registry. And it will actually do auto load of subscription stuff, or you can hit others. For today, we're going to do others because we have our login server, march18.azurecr.io. We know it's V1, so we'll just do that. For a Docker 18 ID, we're going to use the username from here. And for our password, we'll use one of these passwords. Again, I'll regen this as soon as this is over, so I'm not too worried about it. Our service connection name, you can put whatever connection name you want here. So Azure underscore ACR will be my service connection name. And I'm not going to grant access permission to my pipeline just yet. I hit save so you can see what that looks like. So Azure ACR is my service connection to Azure Container Registry. So if we go back here and I have my Docker 2, this time for Container Registry, I'm going to select Azure ACR and hit add. And you know what? I'll give it a display name because why not? Display name. Build Docker, uh, build Docker container image. Hit save. Build container image with container registry full name. That's a really long message. We're going to make it work. So if I did this correctly, we'll refresh. And it says, hey, you try to access a resource, Azure ACR, you haven't granted permissions. So this forces me to grant permissions one by one for each pipeline. Remember that checkbox we saw where it says grant permissions for all pipelines? We could have checked that, but we decided not to. We decided to grant it on a pipeline basis. So I'm going to grant it just for this one pipeline. There we go. Build Docker container image. Our job is getting ready to spin up. And this is going to, again, it's just building on the build agent. Is not pushing anywhere, but it's going to build a container image for Azure Container Registry. Now, if you're doing this with Docker Hub, you just go to hub.docker.com, get an access token, you get your username, set up your service connection, and you can use others or Docker Hub, and very, very similar setup. All right, we're almost done. We're at the .NET Publish step, which is the longest step. Just take another sip of water. And then once it's done publishing the .NET, um, the Blazor web application, got to slow down a little bit there. What it's going to do is it's going to build the container image, but this time it's going to be properly labeled um, using the full path for this Azure Container Registry. I'm probably using the wrong term here, but that's okay. All right, adding all of our labels and make sure I don't move off this step. All right. If we go down here and scroll all the way down, there is the name of our container registry, which is hidden. .azurecr.io/.NET Web App on build ID 57. And then the tag for latest, same name with the tag for latest. Wonderful. That way, my pipeline can just point to a service connection without knowing the actual details of what the name of the container registry is, because that could change. We could have dynamic deployments. We don't know. We just know that we're pointing to the Azure ACR container registry, and then the admin could actually give me permission to use that service connection. I have my admin of my own Azure DevOps org, so I can do it myself. But in a real enterprise scenario, this gives you that nice separation where you can set it up so that your pipelines won't fail. Let's say if you deploy a new container registry or if you migrate, you just have to update your service connections. So I add one more Docker step. We'll use the same container registry, same repository name, .NET Web App. But this one's going to get a little bit more fun. Instead of build and push, we're just going to push. We're going to use the same tags, build ID and latest, and we're going to hit add. And it actually added it in the middle. Let me fix that. I apologize. I had my cursor in the wrong place. I'll do that one more time. So my cursor goes right here, container registry, Azure ACR, .NET Web App. We're going to push, and our tags are build ID and latest. Hit add, and there's our new task. This one, instead of the command being built, the command is push. So it doesn't need the Docker file. It doesn't need quite everything that we need if we're doing a build, but it does need some it does still need the tags, the name of the repository, and the link to the container registry. I'll give it a nice little display name because I love display names. Display name, push container image to Azure Container Registry. That's a nice display name. And then I'm going to update the display name for the job. Build and push Docker container image to Azure Container Registry. I'll even update the name of the job itself, of the unique identifier, Docker build push. Having fun, right? Hit save. Um, Push to ACR is my commit message. Save right there. We're going to go back to the pipeline. And while this is running, just a quick reminder of, you can look up all of this yourself. So for example, if you wanted to go in and look up how to do a Docker push, just this link is in the description box and just put it on the screen. The ecosystems containers push image walks you through how to push a Docker container image from Azure Pipelines to multiple container registries, including Azure Container Registry and Docker Hub and other container registries that are out there. The other things I want to point out, if you are just joining us, all of our slides that we showed at the beginning, all of our source code for all the steps I'll walk you through, it's all on GitHub. GitHub.com, msusdev, end-to-end CI/CD. And again, we got chat. Ask questions in the chat if you want to. If you don't, you have a serious question or maybe a sensitive question for your enterprise, msusdev at Microsoft.com. We want to help in any way we can. All right, I think I stalled enough. We'll go in. Still building that Docker container image, but you know what? It's not that bad. We're building. It's going to build that Docker container image, and then it's going to push that to ACR. So we're going to let that build finish up. And while just checking the chat, make sure there's no questions that I missed. There we go. It's copying everything to the Nginx container. It's applying our labels because we love labels. So my expectation is that very soon we're going to be at the push step. And again, since it's already built, we're just pushing to AzureCR.io. The repository name is .NET Web App. That push was very fast. So if I did this correctly, I should be able to go into Azure, go to, and I'm just for fun, I'm going to regenerate these keys, or I could just disable the admin user entirely since I'm not going to push again for the rest of this demo. And I'm going to go in and go to repositories. There's a .NET Web App repository. There's a latest tag and a container image for number 58. Now, if I want to test this on my local machine, I need to make sure I'm logged in Azure CLI with AZ login. I've already done that, so I'm not going to waste your time there. But I also want to log into Azure Container Registry because if I try to just pull this outright, even though it can access Container Registry um, publicly, that doesn't mean I have authorized to pull this container image. So if I Docker pull that, you'll see that error response authentication required. So let me opt in. AZACR login is the way to do it with Azure CLI. The name, and that's what we put in the name of our instance. So March 18 is the name of our instance. As long as I'm logged into Azure CLI and I have permissions, I should be able to log in. So this is very much like Docker login. All right, so Docker pull. We pull our container image, nice and tidy. I'm going to copy this name because we're going to need it in a second. Docker run detach publish 4,000 map to 80. I'm going to run this container image. So hit enter, go to Visual Studio Code, and go to Docker. There's my .NET Web App. Should have March 18 running on port 4000. So if I click the port, go over here, there's our application that came from Azure Container Registry running locally on my machine. Again, working exactly as I expect. And you know what? We can take it even further. We can actually deploy this to various Azure services. That's the fun of it, right? If you want to deploy it to Azure Web App, I'll walk you through how to do that right now. We will create a resource. We'll go to containers. We'll do a web app for containers. And it's the same as the regular web app walkthrough, but it's just a couple of sensible defaults if you like containers. So resource group is going to be msusdev. I'll call this Sydney March 18.azurewebsites.net. I really don't care about the region, SKU, size, or plan today. I'm going to go skip past deployment and go to Docker. Now, instead of Docker Hub, I'm going to select Azure Container Registry. There's our March 18. But look, it says I need to enable the admin user in order to use this container registry this way. So we're going to go back to open this a new tab. Hopefully I don't have to log in. I'm going to go to my container registry. And just for grins and giggles, I will go ahead and talk on my mask on, enable the admin user, regenerate both of the passwords just in case. And so if I did this correctly, I don't know if I need to refresh this wizard or not. Hit previous, hit next. All right, let me refresh this. Because it may have cached it. So no worries. All right, March 18 .azurewebsites.net. Leaving everything else to its default. So I'm going to skip on over to the Docker tab. Going to pull from Azure Container Registry, March 18th ACR resource, .NET Web App. For the tag, I'm going to choose latest. And then I'm going to hit review create. And that's going to allow me to create this Azure Web App instance. So hit create. And that's our Azure Web App. While that's deploying, I'll show you the same thing for Azure Container App. So just jumping around, March 18th, we're going to go in here, create a resource, containers, Azure Container App. So it looks like we got a question in the chat. Somebody else just said, hey, this, that they appreciate this type of material. We're really glad. Again, we love building out these type of demos. All right, so msusdev for the resource group. For this container app name, I'm going to call this Blazor Web App .NET 6. I'm going to create a container app environment. I'm going to call this Blazor Cube because that sounds really cool. That sounds like the name of a video game. I'm going to go to app settings. It says, do you want to use a quick start image? Absolutely not. I have my own. I'm going to call this container details Blazor.net web app. We're going to pull for Azure Container Registry. This is just the name of the container app itself. So for this registry, March 18, image.net web app, image tag latest, and then CPU memory allocations. I do want HTTP ingress, so I'm going to set traffic from anywhere on port 80, and you know what? I think that's good. We'll hit review create, and there we go. We'll hit create here. And it's deploying a container app. Let's go check out our web app. Looks like our web app is deployed. We'll hit go to resource and hit browse. We have our Blazor web app running on Azure App Service. Again, everything's working just as we expect. We have a locations list. We have our individual locations. All this stuff working as expected. If we let's go see here where container app. Container app still deploying. So we'll take a second before I show off the container app deployment for anybody who's curious. Everything I showed you today, it's on GitHub. All the slides are shown, all the sample code is shown. GitHub.com, msusdev, end-to-end CI/CD. Please, give it a try. If you want to play around with Azure DevOps yourself, docs.microsoft.com/learn. That's our Microsoft Learn modules. We have a really great learning path from building applications with Azure DevOps. Highly recommend you try that out. Just to really share, all these links I've been showing on the screen, they're all in the description box, so you don't have to memorize the screen cap or do anything else like that. All right, so deployment's almost done. Fingers crossed. Um, that don't mess anything up, right? So we got a deployment. There we go. It created our Blazor cube environment. Create all the all the monitoring metrics resources that we're going to need. And then our Blazor Web App.NET 6 container app. And I believe that's the name that's used in the DNS entry or fully qualified domain name. There it is, Blazor Web App.NET 6. And there we go. We have our application, we have our locations list, we have individual locations. Again, really, really exciting stuff. So, showing you a lot today, just really going over what we talked about today. We tested a web app as Docker container. We created an Azure Container Registry resource, and then we did a build and push from Azure Pipelines to ACR using it was just a lot of fun. We got to deploy everything to container apps, web apps at the end. Excuse me. There's so much further you can go here. You can set up a continuous deployment. You can set up your container apps or web apps instances. Container apps being the most interesting here, to automatically redeploy a container image when certain tags are updated. It's again a lot of ways you can go with this. So I hope this information has really getting you started. Lots of reference links that we have in the description box below, to the build push image documentation for those steps that we walk through Azure pipelines. Reference link to our tutorial for Azure App Service. We're deploying the custom container like we just did, and a reference to a tutorial or getting started tutorial for Azure Container Apps where you're using an existing container image. Just like we shown earlier, we have a Microsoft Learn path that we highly recommend you try. Again, all these links are in the description box. Please, check them out. The biggest thing I want you to take away from here, though, is that we have this wonderful swath of resources here. Lots of hyperlinks. If you've missed sessions 1 or 2, please go back in the playlist, check them out. You're gonna see you're gonna see a lot of stuff that I went through pretty fast today. I went through really slow in session 1 around the actual YAML syntax, and a lot of stuff around CI that went through pretty quickly today. I went through really slowly in session 2, and so that we could go fast through those things and then slowly through CD today. Really, really appreciate everybody jumping on for all 3 parts of this series. And I just want to say, and this will be the end of it for me, right? I want to say that please, if you haven't already, go to our GitHub repo, download the slides, download the source code. And if you got any questions, again, msusdev at Microsoft.com. All these links again in the description box. We will see you the next time we are live with our next Dev Radio webinar. Thank you so much for attending.